Great. All right. Your first of the presentations for this morning's session is called a Territorial Conversation. It's been presented by CEO of Waste Management and Recycling Industry, NT. Can I please get you to put your hands together, make him feel very welcome. It's Rick Ralph, everybody.
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which we stand on, the Larrakia Nation, and acknowledge all their past, present and emerging leaders. Territorial Conversation. When I was asked to present at the conference, I was trying to work out, you know, what's going to sort of stimulate a bit of a chat. There's so much noise and other white noise actually happening. How do you sort of bring it back to a territory focus? So what I'm going to try and do for you is to show you how diverse this policy agenda really is and get us thinking for the conference. As much as there's big sky stuff, I think we need to actually narrow it to what does that mean for me? What does this really mean for the territory? I've been involved in the territory now for a number of years. In fact, my first foray into the territory was back in the 70s, 80s, and there's a little legacy called the Can Regatta. Yours truly was one of the architects of that back with the aluminium can recycling. So you know, if it's good, good. If it's not, well. But look, I want to just start with a bit of a, who is this guy? I set up an industry body. I've been around for about 40 odd years. There's my bios and a whole lot of other stuff there. Middle of last year, I decided to have a bit of I suppose, a lifestyle change. Stepped away from a lot of the industry stuff. I still have a passion for the territory and I'm keeping in that. We're a small organisation, but we do punch well above our weight. And I've decided to have a bit of fun with educating on waste and recycling. So I have my own website. I do podcasts, which are getting quite a significant following. I interview operators, companies, people, politicians. I just have a conversation about waste management and recycling. So yeah, that's on there. And if you want to find me, my capability on LinkedIn. So it's all there out there if you'd like to have a chat. So my observations, and these are observations that and how we're actually at this point. It really was very easy in waste management and recycling for many, many years in the process. I won't bore you with the history, but you need to go back to 2013 when the game really changed, when China sent a signal out to actually that they were going to change the way they managed their waste and recycling. But did anyone really listen to that signal that happened? And that is really the point, the pivotal point that started to really, really make a difference in the way that China moved with their materials. They sent the signals. If you go to my podcast, I've done a couple of chats with Nick Harford. We give a bit of a history to how we got there and a few of them, and it does put some context. So we weren't blindsided, but in many respects, we didn't pay attention. I think the other part is Australian waste and recycling policies are complex and they're diverse. They really are quite detailed now. Sadly though, the squeakiest wheel is getting all the attention, but is the wheel going to the right place? And I use things like, we've got really big issues with, and you hear the old chestnuts, tyres and stuff, textiles, but is anyone really addressing the seriously emerging issues? You know, solar panels. Yeah, we've got a process there. We had a fire 2 weeks ago in a front lift truck, result of a fire panel. A solar panel. So, you know, we focus on, and I don't dismiss it for a moment, about straws and coffee cups and stuff like that, but are we really allowing the focus to be what it should be? Stakeholder groups have expanded. They've gone from the traditional 2 levels of government, state government, local government and industry operators now to a very diverse group of stakeholders. And I'll show you that stakeholder mix in a moment. The good news is the community has been woken and they're paying address. But the sad news is social media and the sugar hit is disrupting the conversation more than ever. And we all see how that, you know, from a political point of view, how that gets changed very, very quickly and jumps on board. The new stakeholder order, let's start at the top. Federal government departments, environment, manufacturing and hazardous waste, and the list goes on. State and territory governments, all portfolios. Now, all of these are stakeholders whenever they go out in the process. So think about the complexities. You've got local government, you've got individual councils, you've got their associations and the various ROCs. You've got the associations, and I do note that WAMA was dropped off it. And I acknowledge Gail here as the CEO, my colleague, so I will address that. So my apologies, my apologies, Gail, that was an oversight. Existing product stewardship schemes. So they're existing schemes, right, wrong or indifferent. Are they working? We won't get into that debate, but they're stakeholders. And if you think behind the scheme of the companies, you've got plus 19 emerging new product stewardship schemes. Now, I've been in the game 40 odd years. I've seen a lot of waste, been around the world and a lot. I'm yet to see a baby car seat cause a problem in waste. And yet we're going to have a product stewardship for car seats. Interesting, but that demonstrates the significance that all these industry groups now are getting very serious about their waste, their items, and how they manage those issues in their own space. Then the list goes on. We've got all major retailers now getting involved in it. We've got Woolworths, Aldi, Bunnings, we've got the rest. And don't forget Facebook, TikTok, and all those things and what comes next week. So when government's putting together policies, and when you're talking about legislation, and when you talk about the issues, that is the complex and diverse world that we're all now having to work in. So when you're in Nhulunbuy, Managrita, wherever you are, and you're saying, why are we doing some of this stuff? The biggest challenge is our local issues have got to cut through a lot of the time that bloody white noise. And it's very difficult, very, very difficult. So the disruptor, missing for all time was the federal government. Now, we've all been critical in the process of it. They were missing in action for years, and many of us that have been in the game a long time advocated, when are you going to lift the game and set some direction? So what happened? In 2018, they lifted the National Waste Policy. Great. Finally, we had something that was actually happening. And then in 2019, we had the action plan. But out of nowhere, we got 90 separate actions. So go back to cast the mind to all those stakeholder groups and all those agendas that are coming out. Finally, we got some movement. Good stuff. So it was actually there. Then COAG and the ministers of the environment meetings was reborn. So you've got the policies, you've got things. So what happened? The 8th meeting of environment ministers in December in Canberra all got on the bus and said, we're now going to do something here. So federal government and state and territory governments got together. So your government, this government here, are on the bus in 2018. 2019, all of a sudden now we've got the progressive timetables. Things started to move. Again, politically, everyone's on the same bus. Then 2021, bang, all these other issues are actually happening. So the pace of reform and legislation and activity is happening at such a rapid rate, but are we keeping up with it in terms of, you hear about, market demand, investment, infrastructure planning. There's a very, very big disconnect between having the policy and the legislation and actually from a business point of view, actually getting the capital to build something, let alone get it planning, let alone get it regulated. So what does this mean for us in a territory point of view? Australian waste and recycling issues, there is no doubt, are being driven by big city, big policy agendas, and the territory has a ticket on that bus. The ministers are sitting at the table. So the territorial ministers have got a voice at the table. That's very, very, very important because that's where we need to influence that. However, territory stakeholders must ask, how do we leverage that agenda to address our issues and not get sucked into big city thinking? What's shown me once and absolutely, the agendas, and having been in the game and seen it across the board, I acknowledge, and we have to acknowledge, and for the stakeholders that have turned up today, Gail and Peter and the other team members, you hear it constantly that the territory is different. Ladies and gentlemen, we are, and you must take address of that difference. The opportunity is, how do we use the big city thinking and the big process when you have a look at all of those stakeholders that are now engaged? How do we leverage that to our advantage to get our more complex issues sorted out? Other states are not necessarily well ahead. They've all achieved different outcomes, and all the NT is starting from a low base point I actually think there's more upside than there is downside to that discussion. Because don't forget, we're all at the same table. Despite the complexities, the territorial issues do need to be differentiated and must be acknowledged in this form to be different. It's about the stakeholder politics, foremost and front and centre. In my view, never has the opportunity presented itself for change better than it is at the moment, and the Northern Territory must advocate differently. It will be heard despite all the excessive white noise. The fact that you've got the various companies here, the fact that people are now starting to address Peter, Gail and people like that are engaging. You're a player, you're at the table, but the issues have to be we need to think a little bit. There's no silver bullet in all of this, definitely no silver bullet, but we need to actually think about what it. So going the distance for country. From an industry perspective, waste and recycling companies, you hear all the time, what's the industry doing? What's the industry doing? What's the industry doing? We are but a minor cog in a very, very big wheel. But we are the facilitators. All of your solutions for waste management, every single one of them for waste management, the companies in the territory can deliver your aspirations. You don't need to go to bloody America or New York or Adelaide, sorry, source code boys, sorry. But you know, all jokes aside, the industry in the territory have the tentacles and the networks in place to find those answers. So use local business. Don't go issuing tenders where you actually need to try and find someone in Port Hedland or in, you know, Cloncurry and stuff. Your solutions are sitting in this room here today. If they don't know, they know someone who does know. And I think that's important for you to understand. Pose a couple of questions. When listening to all the presentations, challenge each of you to think how this will address my local issue, address my community expectations, and work at ground level today and tomorrow and next week. How's it going to work in Tennant Creek? How's it going to work in Yumundamu, Menegrita? Ask those questions. Don't get thinking, oh, that's pretty good in Melbourne, we can do this. Bring that big city thinking thought process here, but bring it back here and start to think in the process. Ask hard questions. Ask questions that challenge, that spotlight the differences. How will this work in those regions where you've got 750 kilometres to the mothership, where you're moving materials from, it's not bailing of the cars, it's the fact that you put the baler with all the PLCs on the semi and it shakes the Jesus out of all the PLCs, so when it gets out there, it's broken. And it takes 3 weeks to get the parts in to fix the baler. So think how we actually address those issues. It's easy to bail cars in Ballarat, very different when there's 750 Ks from Alice Springs and you've got 1,500 motor vehicles. Who has to pay for this and how? We know all levels of government are adverse to taxes. There's a lot of debate about landfill tax, they levies, they work, they don't work, how, whether to do it, etc. The reality is in the territory, it would be nigh impossible, and Gail and I could have a debate till the cows come home on this, but it is nigh impossible. I think the complexities, there's a far greater issues than putting tax on waste in the territory to actually try and improve recycling when we can't even manage the existing stuff we've got at the moment. We've got to think differently. Now that might be through landfill bans, it might be through regulation, it might be through some other stuff. Doesn't say we don't have solutions, but I think we have to think a little bit differently because of the demographics, and we also have to think about the cultural issues that we have in the territory. Very, very different, as we all know. We need to ask ourselves, can you demonstrate, have you considered the cultural challenges, our diverse demographics, scale and intensity? Big is not better, big is not bigger. So what is the micro size that we can bring down? What is the scalability of the size we can do? We know that C&I crushing concrete is 50,000 tonne, 80,000 tonne. We mightn't have that volume, but can we do it with 5,000 tonne? What can we do with that 5,000 tonne? Importantly, everyone's playing in the sandpit, but everyone's using different toys. That's the reality of it. And I use that on the analogy, you've got waste levies, you've got different product stewardship schemes, you've got a whole process, but everybody's still in that sandpit. Everyone's got the same issues in the process. This means our territory does have an equal voice and a seat at the main table. We need to leverage that. Your minister sits with all the MEM ministers. We need to give your minister, our minister, we need to give her the tools and the issues to put on the table so that she is a voice. And so when she's sitting with Trevor Resident, when she's sitting with the other state ministers, she says, hang on, what about us? And not get sucked into what's going down in Sydney or in Adelaide or in Perth. We must leverage this opportunity for our own unique circumstances. And we must think differently how we can contribute, but not by necessarily following everyone else's agenda. The issues are very simple, but they're very complex. The number of different stakeholders out there are driving change at a rapid rate. And we can't influence that, nor can we stop it. But what we need to start thinking about is stop thinking necessarily just going down this path, saying, hang on, halt, stop the bus. Our issues are here. How are we going to address that? From a industry perspective, don't feel afraid to say, no, we don't agree with that. We want to do this because of that. And that's, I guess, all I'm flagging to at this conference. You know, you've got some great resources in here. You've got some great people who are going to present and stuff. But challenge ourselves to start thinking, hang on, will that work in Nullarbor? Taking Con's, comment about bringing bottles and stuff out at Nullarbor. He's right, we can't get cars out of those places. So, we need to actually start thinking, what do we do a little bit differently? But there is no silver bullet. So I guess thank you for the opportunity to have a chat with you. I'm around and whatever. The industry body is available and a resource and a tool to all the councils and everyone there. You can become associate memberships, etc. But please enjoy, challenge, but I do urge you to think differently in the process. Thank you. Yeah, go for it.
Were there any questions that people had asked while we're standing up there? No? All right.
Thank you.
Could we please thank Rick one more time for the opening presentation?